Hello and welcome to the Bald Truth Review, episode 13. Now yesterday we saw the issue of 3 police officers who just over a year ago had been absolutely condemned by the Supreme Court in the UK for their actions involving the bugging of the hire car in the Curtis Warren case. Yet yesterday we learned that in a closed behind doors disciplinary session at a local hotel, the Jersey officers were completely exonerated of any offence. Now, good news, you might think, but is it? Whilst our Ask No Questions mainstream media seem quite happy to accept this is the case, surely a number of questions do arise. Firstly, if the police actions could be so condemned in the United Kingdom, how do we get this anomaly where suddenly they're completely innocent? Further still, if the actions of the police needed condemnation and a disciplinary hearing, why weren't the law officers who actually okayed this operation hauled before some kind of disciplinary board? Indeed, take that a bit further, who does monitor the law officers? Who are they responsible to? The reality is, and unfortunately the mainstream media don't seem to have picked up on this, nobody monitors our law officers in Jersey. Can that be healthy for our democracy? Most people would surely say that it cannot. And there's another question that surely arises from all of this. Since Senator Ian Lamurkle has been Home Affairs Minister, we've seen countless disciplinary proceedings started. A great number of these investigations initiated involving external police forces and utilising taxpayers' money. Millions of pounds of taxpayers' money. Yet, to the best of our knowledge, not one officer has actually been disciplined as a consequence of all these inquiries. Isn't it time that the Home Affairs Minister told us exactly how much he's now spent? I did ask this question just over a year ago, and I see that Deputy Montfort-Tadier is now going to attempt to get that information or non-information updated. What also suggests itself to me is that isn't it time that PAC started to look at this process of taxpayers' money being spent willy-nilly on all of these disciplinary investigations and no firm results coming out of it? At the end of the day, it's our money. Democracy, or the lack of it in Jersey. Now, 243 years after the events of 1769, isn't it ironic that once again we see Senator Philip Balash seemingly doing his best to erode our democracy even further? As viewers will recall, I've highlighted before that when Senator Balash stood for election, his platform was largely built around a couple of things. Now, one of those was respect for other members, and yet, as we've said, he criticises, attacks whoever he likes, and seems to be allowed to do so in breach of standing orders by both the bailiff and the deputy bailiff. The Senator's other big thing for his electoral platform was that states mustn't waste so much time debating, redebating things that had already been decided. Yet now, this week, we learn that he's effectively trying to undermine another issue that had already been decided. We saw him hijack the Electoral Commission, the Independent Electoral Commission, brought by former Deputy Daniel Wimberley. We saw the Senator attempt to overturn the Plymouth vote, which had already been decided on by the states. Now it seems Senator Balash wants to finish off the Troy Rule. Now, the Troy Rule, for those viewers who are not aware of this, was set in place to ensure that with a lack of party politics, there was always be more members in the states who were backbenchers, who were not in the executive, than sat in the Council of Ministers as ministers or assistant ministers. This is a fundamental safeguard, a safety valve to ensure that the party, such as it exists, would not have a built-in majority at all times. Now, why am I critical of Senator Balash here? Well, we talk about the Electoral Commission, and we know that the Senator wants to cut numbers in the states down to 42. Okay, most of us agree that numbers can be cut by a certain number. But at the same time, we now learn that the Senator wants a fully fledged foreign minister. He wants the job himself, as it happens. We also now know that Senator Balash and the Chief Minister want a Justice Minister. The result of all this would be that the number of ministries would increase from 10 to 12. And of course, they'd all want an assistant minister, or bag carrier as they're often known. What this would translate to is that we would have something like 24 members in the executive. In an assembly of 42, that would leave only 18 backbenchers. Effectively, it would be a dictatorship. There would be no opposition, and there would be no possibility, really, of overturning these decisions. Again, the question has to be asked: what is being done to democracy? Why is the Senator so driven to cement power in the hands of so few? Most people who follow politics would say that the fundamental aspect of a good democracy that must be there is a strong opposition. Under what Senator Balash and his acolytes are proposing, there could not be any effective opposition. Whistleblowers and criminals. Can the two overlap? Yesterday in the UK, we learned that a senior Metropolitan Police officer, Detective Chief Inspector April Casburn, was found guilty of leaking confidential information to the News of the World for financial gain. Well, viewers will probably remember that it's not so long ago that we saw a couple of failed senators in Jersey trying to muddy the waters to suggest that former Chief Investigating Officer Lenny Harper should be investigated for possible leaking of information during the Hope Le Gren investigation. Now, of course, such suggestions were completely without foundation. Nevertheless, they were hugely reported in the island. But what we did learn along these lines, thanks to the BDO scrutiny review which I chaired, was that another officer, Mick Gradwell, was named by the Home Affairs Minister as having leaked information during a live child abuse investigation to the Daily Mail, the journalist in question, David Rose. Now, what I'd like to raise here, and what's important, is in the UK we've seen absolute condemnation of what this police woman did. Indeed, Detective Chief Superintendent Gordon Briggs described her actions as totally unacceptable from a serving police officer to leak confidential information about a live investigation to journalists. Now, in Jersey, of course, we saw no investigation whatsoever into what the Home Affairs Minister and a witness at the BDO scrutiny review alleged was the leaking of information by Mr. Gradwell. Why was there no investigation? Can we be completely sure, as hopefully we can, that no monies were involved? Why, given the fact that the Home Affairs Minister is so fond, so dedicated to initiating all these very many disciplinary investigations, why was this incident not looked into? The other thing that jumps out at you about all of this is, of course, that while in the UK a police officer is absolutely condemned for our actions, in Jersey, the local newspaper, the Jersey Evening Pravda, tried to rewrite history to describe Mr. Gradwell's actions as that of a whistleblower. A whistleblower. Leaking information during a live child abuse investigation. Now, surely if there are any investigative journalists within the Jersey mainstream media, they should be taking the approach that the UK is. Let us find out that there is nothing more to this other than incredibly bad judgment on the part of a police officer. Now I'm going to end this week's Bald Truth Review with a recurring theme. 1769 and the events of September 28th. Back then, 2.5 centuries ago, the events set in motion by Tom Grushey and his fellow islanders led, amongst other things, to the stripping away of the Royal Court's legislative powers. Now, I'd like to ask viewers, in 2013, how much has really changed in all those years? After all, we still have a judge, the island's chief judge, presiding over the State's Assembly, a non-elected chief judge who presides over an assembly made up of representatives elected by you, the public. Now, in a previous assembly, Deputy Shona Pittman brought forward a proposition calling for an end to the dual role of the bailiff, and thus the creation of a full separation of powers in line with the vast majority of democracies in the world. Not surprisingly, of course, the motion was defeated. The Establishment Party rallied the troops and the vote was thrown out. What we were told then was that the public didn't want this separation of powers. Okay, well, what I'd like to suggest is this. In April 2013, we're going to have a referendum about electoral reform, not least being the question, should we retain the constables? Why not put this contention that the public, the majority of the public, are quite happy having an unelected judge presiding over elected representatives? Let's put it to the test. A simple question. Do you agree that the head of the judiciary should preside over the legislature? How difficult is that? I think it would be an ideal question. So I'll leave you there and remind you, as always, get involved, because if you don't do politics, politics will do you.